The black void of space trembled as the warship Erevan drifted, sparks scattering like dying stars across its fractured hull. Rian stood in the shattered command deck, his reflection fractured in broken glass. The emergency alarms screamed, red pulses beating like a dying heart across metal walls. Rian said, "The Empire rises from shadows we thought buried." He clenched his fists as distant transmissions bled through static, whispers of fleets uniting under a forgotten banner. Fear spread through the crew like wildfire, their eyes searching for direction, yet finding only a reluctant man scarred by past battles. Rian whispered, "Not again, I will not fail them again." Beyond the viewport, stars shifted unnaturally, a signal cutting through with eerie clarity, declaring the rebirth of Dominion. The silence after was heavier than the alarms, a suffocating truth pressing down, as the galaxy's fate turned inescapably toward war. The silence after the transmission gnawed deeper than the alarms had. Rian leaned heavily against the console, the weight of his past failures threatening to suffocate him. Marcus, his loyal confidant, stepped closer, his steady voice anchoring the spiraling fear. Marcus said, "You cannot run from this, not anymore." Rian's jaw tightened, memories of burned colonies and broken promises flashing through his mind like scars he could not escape. The crew shifted uneasily, waiting for orders, waiting for hope. Outside the viewport, the stars pulsed with unnatural rhythm, as if mocking the fragility of humanity's place in the galaxy. Rian whispered to himself, "How can I lead them when I couldn't save the last?" The crew heard his doubt, but Marcus' firm hand on his shoulder silenced the uncertainty, a single gesture of faith amidst the darkness. The ship groaned under unseen forces as the transmission repeated, a voice cold and calculated echoing across the fractured deck. The antagonist's words carried promises of unity twisted into chains. Seraphine said, "The galaxy has always needed order, and now I will give it." Her voice chilled the crew, piercing through static like a blade. Rian clenched his teeth, the name alone dragging him back into memories buried in shame. The betrayer Kale shifted uneasily near the rear, his eyes calculating, lips curling at the thought of opportunity. The message ended, leaving only the hum of the failing ship. Marcus muttered, "So she lives," Rian replied, "and she intends to finish what we once began." The crew froze, realization dawning that their commander's past was entwined with the enemy they now faced. Rian's thoughts spiraled, images of Seraphine beside him years ago, their shared ideals before betrayal. The ship's trembling shook him back, forcing choice where hesitation killed. Kale stepped forward, false sympathy dripping from his words. Kale said, "Perhaps surrender spares us needless blood." The crew gasped, whispers rippling. Marcus's glare could have burned through armor as he barked, "You speak treason." Rian raised his hand, silencing both, his voice torn yet sharp. Rian said, "Surrender is death. If she rises, the galaxy falls." His words cracked yet rang with truth, steadying the shaken crew. The dim lights flickered, casting long shadows that made Kale's smirk all the more dangerous. Though unspoken, betrayal's seed had already taken root in the heart of the ship. The crew scrambled to stabilize failing systems, hands flying across panels sparking with resistance. Rian steadied himself, his voice low but commanding now. Rian said, "We move to the nearest safe station. We regroup, we survive." The words carried the weight of reluctant leadership, yet they resonated. Marcus gave a faint nod, relief washing his worn face. Kale turned away, hiding his disdain in shadow. Beyond the viewport, the stars pulsed again, as if watching, waiting for destiny to unfold. The transmission had marked the dawn of a war none were ready for. In that moment, the reluctant leader stepped forward, not because he believed, but because there was no one else to carry the burden. The galaxy's empire was rising, and the first crack of resistance had just been born aboard the broken Erevan. The Erevan limped into orbit around a remote outpost, its hull scarred but still alive. The crew staggered off consoles, their exhaustion heavy in every step. Rian stood at the viewport, haunted by the echo of Seraphine's voice. Marcus approached slowly, his tone firm but steady. Marcus said, "Your people look to you, not to ghosts." Rian turned sharply, guilt tightening his chest as memory of fallen comrades clawed at him. Beyond the glass, the outpost flickered with faint lights, a fragile sanctuary in an uncaring void. Kale lingered near the shadows, his smirk half hidden, eyes darting toward opportunities unseen. Rian forced his voice into strength, though cracks still showed. Rian said, "We hold here, we breathe here, then we fight again." The words were spoken not with conviction, but with desperation, and still they carried weight. The docking bay filled with sparks as engineers rushed to patch torn panels. The crew, battered but alive, moved with heavy purpose. Liora, the survivor, emerged from a damaged transport, her scarred face illuminated by harsh floodlights. She had endured horrors beyond words, her eyes sharp with unspoken warnings. Rian approached, hesitant yet curious, his voice low. Rian said, "You lived where no one could." Liora's response cut like steel, her tone hardened by survival. Liora said, "I lived, but I did not escape." The silence after her words carried more weight than screams, binding every ear in dread. The station creaked under pressure, as if the universe itself listened to her scars. In her presence, hope and fear warred within the crew, for she carried truths the galaxy had tried to bury. The mess hall carried the stale taste of recycled air and heavy silence. The crew gathered around dim tables, their plates untouched. Marcus broke the silence, his voice firm yet compassionate. Marcus said, "Fear cannot bind us, only resolve will." Rian listened, torn between shame and the weight of duty pressing into his bones. Across the hall, Kale leaned back, eyes scanning faces for weakness, lips curling at each flicker of doubt. Liora remained distant, her gaze far away, haunted by memories no one dared ask about. Rian finally rose, his voice unsteady but louder than his doubt. Rian said, "I will not abandon this fight, even if my hands still shake." The crew's eyes lifted, a spark of fragile belief beginning to stir. Later, in a quiet chamber, lit by failing lanterns, Marcus confronted Rian directly. Marcus said, "You doubt yourself more than anyone else ever could." Rian exhaled sharply, his fists trembling as shame poured through him. Rian said, "I failed them, Marcus." Every voice silenced echoes in me. Marcus leaned closer, his tone carrying years of wisdom and scars of battles past. Marcus said, "Failure forges leaders. Only cowards run from it." The words struck deep, harder than steel, tearing into Rian's walls of guilt. Silence stretched, broken only by the hum of power conduits. For a moment, Rian's gaze steadied, his breathing slower, his stance stronger. The shadow of Seraphine loomed large in his mind. But Marcus's words began to anchor him back toward the man he was meant to be. The night cycle fell upon the outpost, artificial stars flickering through reinforced glass. Rian stood alone, staring into endless void, Seraphine's words replaying in his mind. Kale's voice slithered from the shadows, low and cunning. Kale said, "Her empire is rising, and you know it will swallow us all." Rian turned, fire sparking in his weary eyes. Rian said, "Then I'll stand in its way, even if I break." Kale's smirk deepened, his silence more dangerous than his words. From the hall, Marcus watched unseen, his worry cloaked in patience. Outside, the void pulsed once again, as though the galaxy itself held its breath. In that fragile moment, Rian's doubt began to harden into the first spark of defiance. The reluctant leader was slowly being forged by fire he could no longer avoid. The outpost's council chamber flickered with failing lights, shadows stretching across cold metal walls. Rian stood before a table of faction leaders, their distrust sharp in every glance. Each had lost more than they could voice, yet unity was their only hope. Marcus stood at his side, steady and unyielding, his presence a shield. Liora leaned silently in the corner, her scars speaking louder than words. The council murmured in dissent, voices filled with anger, suspicion, and grief. Rian raised his voice, breaking through. Rian said, "We face an empire reborn, and if we remain divided, we fall before we even fight." The silence that followed was brittle, fragile as glass, but in it, a faint glimmer of possibility stirred. The first stone of rebellion trembled into place, though the cracks of doubt threatened to shatter it. Arguments erupted, filling the chamber with chaos. Leaders pounded fists, accusations spilling like venom. One shouted, "You failed before, why should we follow now?" Rian's jaw tightened, the weight of every loss pressing hard against his ribs. Kale leaned forward from the shadows, his voice smooth as oil. Kale said, "Perhaps Seraphine offers more stability than your fractured cause." Gasps filled the chamber, outrage mingled with fear. Marcus stepped forward, voice cutting sharp as a blade. Marcus said, "Her stability is built on chains." The chamber's air grew thick with rage, betrayal, and unease. Rian forced his voice to rise above the storm, every word trembling with conviction. Rian said, "I will fight her, with or without you." The chamber fell to silence, broken only by the echo of his defiance. Later, in the docking bay, chaos roared as ships prepared for departure. Some factions refused to stay, their distrust outweighing fear of the Empire. Rian watched them leave, bitterness twisting in his chest. Marcus's voice cut through the noise, calm yet firm. Marcus said, "Let them go. Unity cannot be forced." Rian exhaled, his shoulders heavy as stone, yet he nodded. Liora stood nearby, her gaze cold as she whispered. Liora said, "They will regret leaving." Kale watched smugly, his eyes gleaming at the fractures deepening within the cause. Sparks burst from welding torches, shadows dancing across steel, echoing the tension within the crew. Rian clenched his jaw, his voice steady but hollow. Rian said, "Then we stand with who remains. Even if the galaxy turns its back." The night cycle dimmed the corridors, casting long shadows where whispers thrive. Rian walked alone, thoughts tangled in guilt and defiance. From the darkness, Kale's voice slithered out. Kale said, "She knows your weakness. She always did." Rian froze, anger sparking in his chest. He turned, his eyes narrowed. Rian said, "And you know nothing of loyalty." Kale stepped closer, smirk unfading, his words sharp. Kale said, "Loyalty feeds the grave. Ambition builds empires." The tension between them thickened, silence pressing like a blade. Rian's hand hovered near his sidearm, but he restrained himself, his fury coiled tight. Kale chuckled softly, his shadow melting back into the dim corridor. The seeds of betrayal had sunk deeper, roots twisting silently through steel and blood. In the command center, silence reigned as Rian gazed over maps of star systems now falling under Seraphine's banner. Each red-marked world pulsed like a wound across the galaxy. Marcus entered, his calm voice steadying the storm. Marcus said, "You cannot fight her shadow with hesitation." Rian's fists pressed into the table, his breath heavy. Rian said, "Every world she takes is blood on my hands." Marcus placed a hand on his shoulder, his tone soft yet firm. Marcus said, "Then stop her before the blood drowns us all." Liora stepped in, her scarred face lit by cold glow, her voice sharp. Liora said, "You need to strike first, not wait to bleed." Rian lifted his gaze, doubt still lingering, but a spark of defiance burned stronger than before. The council chamber lights dimmed as a new figure entered, cloaked in shadows. Seraphine's image, larger than life, flickered across the holographic table, her voice cold yet magnetic. Seraphine said, "The galaxy was always broken, but I will mend it through order." Her words dripped with conviction, twisting truth into chains. Rian's chest tightened as he recognized her presence not as rumor, but as a storm. Marcus muttered low, "The past returns with teeth." Kale watched, his smirk widening as if savoring her rise. The crew froze, the weight of her revelation pressing like iron. Seraphine's eyes seemed to pierce directly into Rian, forcing memories of battles once shared and trust once broken. She ended her message with a vow. Seraphine said, "I will reign, and no one will stop me." Silence crushed the chamber after, heavy as stone. Rian staggered back, her words striking deeper than any blade. He whispered under his breath, "She lives." Marcus's eyes narrowed, suspicion gnawing at him. Marcus said, "Your silence explains more than you admit." The crew exchanged uneasy glances, the unspoken question echoing. What bound Rian to Seraphine? Kale leaned forward, his tone poisonous. Kale said, "Our commander once stood with her." Gasps cut through the chamber, disbelief mingled with betrayal. Rian's fists trembled as he fought for words. Rian said, "I walked away when her vision turned to ash. I will not let her finish it." His voice cracked, guilt lacing every syllable. Marcus placed a hand firmly on his shoulder, anchoring him. Marcus said, "Then prove it. Show them who you are now." The chamber's silence turned from suspicion into fragile anticipation. Later, in a private chamber, Rian's composure cracked. He slammed his fists against the table, his voice hoarse. Rian said, "I built the foundation she now corrupts." Marcus stood firm, refusing to waver. Marcus said, "And now you must tear it down." Liora entered quietly, her scar catching the faint light, her voice sharper than steel. Liora said, "If she rises, worlds will burn as mine did." The weight of her words silenced them. The memory of ash etched into her eyes. Rian lowered his head, shame and rage battling within. He exhaled heavily, his resolve trembling into form. Rian said, "Then I will face her, even if the galaxy despises me." Marcus and Liora exchanged glances, both seeing the reluctant leader clawing back his strength. The moment carried the first real flame of defiance. The transmission replayed, Seraphine's voice echoing in the command center. Her words spoke of destiny, strength, and sacrifice twisted into obedience. Rian watched the hologram, his breath ragged. Kale smirked in the shadows, enjoying the chaos her presence unleashed. Marcus broke the silence, his tone sharp. Marcus said, "Her empire grows stronger while we waste time debating." Liora added, her voice low, "She will not stop until all kneel." Rian raised his head, fire cutting through his doubt. Rian said, "Then we strike where she is weakest, before her chains tighten." His words startled the crew, their fear bending into reluctant hope. The path forward was set not by choice, but by necessity. Seraphine's shadow stretched across the galaxy, but the first spark of rebellion ignited here. The outpost night cycle deepened, stars glittering faintly beyond reinforced glass. Alone on the observation deck, Rian whispered to the void. Rian said, "She was once my ally, my friend, and I let her become this." His reflection stared back, fractured by guilt. Marcus joined him silently, his calm presence steadying the storm. Marcus said, "You cannot undo the past, but you can decide its echo." Rian exhaled, shoulders straightening under the burden. The galaxy's silence pressed heavy, yet within it, his doubt began to harden into resolve. From the corner shadows, Kale watched silently, his eyes gleaming with ambition, his loyalties already bending. The stars pulsed brighter, as if the universe itself recognized the moment. The reluctant leader's path had shifted. War was no longer coming. War had already begun. The Seraphine sailed through fractured space, its engines coughing sparks, destination hidden within enemy lines. Rian stood at the tactical display, eyes locked on the red zones spreading like fire. Marcus leaned over the console, his tone sharp with urgency. Marcus said, "If we hesitate, she'll take 3 more systems before dawn." Liora crossed her arms, her scar glinting in the glow. Liora said, "Strike first, or we'll be the ashes others choke on." Rian's voice cracked, his guilt grinding against his resolve. Rian said, "Every choice I make costs lives. I won't trade one slaughter for another." Kale smirked from the corner, whispering venom. Kale said, "Perhaps slaughter is the only path to victory." The silence afterward weighed heavier than the hull, pressing every breath into stone. The first strike mission was set, but the crew's trust fractured like glass. In the hangar, pilots prepared their fighters, helmets clutched tight, fear masked by duty. Rian paced the walkway above, his hands trembling as he tried to bury doubt. Marcus joined him, voice steady as iron. Marcus said, "They follow you because they must. Now give them reason to believe." Rian exhaled, gripping the railing as memories of Seraphine's voice tore through him. Liora walked past below, her scarred face unreadable, her steps as heavy as stone. Kale whispered among mechanics, his words laced with poison, his smirk unshaken. The engines roared alive, their thunder carrying the weight of rebellion. For the first time, the galaxy's fate balanced on fragile wings of desperate ships. The first raid struck a supply hub, fire scattering across void-black space. Explosions painted the stars in cruel bursts of red. Rian's voice shook through the comms, yet carried command. Rian said, "Stay in formation, hit their cores, and pull back fast." Marcus's calm responses cut through chaos, his discipline anchoring the crew. Lyra's fighter carved paths with precision, her survival instincts guiding every strike. Kale's voice snarled across the channel, reckless with ambition. Kale said, "Push harder, take everything, leave nothing standing." The clash escalated, fighters swarming like hornets in a storm. Amid the fire, Rian felt both dread and exhilaration, the return of a commander's weight he had tried to bury. In this storm, rebellion was no longer whisper, but roar. The raid succeeded, but the victory was bitter. Survivors returned to the hangar, faces pale, voices heavy with loss. Sparks rained from damaged fighters as crews scrambled to repair. Rian climbed from his cockpit, sweat plastering his hair, guilt dripping with every breath. Marcus approached, hand gripping his shoulder firmly. Marcus said, "They lived because of your orders." Rian shook his head, his voice cracked. Rian said, "They died because of them too." Liora stood nearby, silent, her eyes a mirror of pain and survival. Kale's smirk never faded, his tone sharp. Kale said, "A few sacrifices buy us a war worth winning." The crew froze, anger flashing in their eyes. Marcus glared, his jaw tight, while Rian's silence screamed louder than words. That night cycle, the crew gathered in the dim mess hall, grief thick as smoke. Rian sat apart, eyes buried in shadows, his silence louder than the hum of engines. Marcus addressed the crew, his tones steady yet heavy. Marcus said, "We are still here, and that matters more than fear." His words steadied them, even as Kale muttered venom at the edges. Liora rose, her scar catching the light, her voice sharp. Liora said, "We fight because we refuse to kneel." The crew's fists tapped tables, small defiance against despair. Rian finally stood, his voice trembling but strong. Rian said, "We are broken, but broken does not mean beaten." In that moment, fractured hope wove fragile threads into unity, even as shadows lingered. The rebel fleet gathered near a dying star, ships battered but defiant. Engines hummed like restless drums, their light casting fractured beams across broken hulls. Rian stood at the command table, eyes locked on the projected Empire fleet, a storm rising in crimson waves. Marcus steadied him with a firm nod, voice low. Marcus said, "You've carried doubt long enough. Let this be the moment you carry them." Liora checked her weapon systems, her scar catching the glow, her voice edged with fire. Liora said, "We don't have tomorrow. We strike now, or we're dust." Kale lingered at the rear, whispering to unseen allies, his betrayal already unfolding in silence. Rian clenched his fists, his voice cutting sharp through the tension. Rian said, "This ends tonight." His words rang with finality, heavy as the fate of galaxies. The first clash ignited the void as the Empire fleet descended, sleek warships cutting through starlight like blades. Explosions bloomed, metal shrieked, and the galaxy seemed to roar. Rian's commands thundered through comms, his voice no longer fractured. Rian said, "Hold the line. Break their flank. Every world depends on this." Marcus relayed orders with unyielding precision, his calm anchoring chaos. Liora's ship darted through enemy lines, her survival instincts sharp as steel. Kale's voice cracked with reckless hunger. Kale said, "Drive harder, take them all down." But his maneuvers sowed disorder, unraveling cohesion. Amid fire and wreckage, Rian felt the weight of destiny settle not as curse, but as command. The reluctant leader had become the storm's heart, even as betrayal seeped unseen in shadows. In the heat of battle, betrayal struck. Kale disabled comm channels of allied wings, leaving them exposed. Fighters screamed into fire, their deaths carved in silence. Rian slammed his fist against the console, fury lashing his voice. Rian said, "Kale, what have you done?" Kale's laughter echoed, sharp and venomous. Kale said, "I serve the one who will rule." The revelation tore through the crew, rage and disbelief igniting. Marcus's voice thundered. Marcus said, "You damned us all for your ambition." The fleet staggered, but Rian refused collapse. He barked into comms, his voice fierce. Rian said, "Rally to me. He won't break us." Amid betrayal and fire, the battle's weight bore down, testing every soul. Kale's treachery turned victory into blood-soaked chaos, and Seraphine's shadow loomed closer with every breath. The Empire's flagship emerged, a behemoth of steel and fire. And with it, Seraphine's voice swept across channels. Seraphine said, "Did you think you could defy destiny, Rian?" Her tone was silk woven with iron, a dagger dipped in memory. Rian froze, haunted by the ghost of who she once was. Marcus growled, his defiance sharp. Marcus said, "Her destiny ends here." Liora fired into the void, her fighter carving paths through swarms, her voice resolute. Liora said, "We hold or we die. Choose." Rian gritted his teeth, voice breaking into fire. Rian said, "All ships on me. We burn her empire tonight." Explosions flared, the galaxy trembling under the clash of ideals, loyalty and betrayal. This was no longer a battle for survival. It was judgment forged in stars. The climax roared as fleets collided, fire blinding and endless. Rian's flagship plunged towards Seraphine's behemoth, hull screaming under impact fire. He gripped the console, his voice thunderous. Rian said, "For every world she's taken, we strike her heart." Marcus braced beside him, calm within chaos, his tone iron. Marcus said, "Then lead us through hell." Liora's ship burst through swarms, engines aflame, her scream defiant. Liora said, "I'll carve the path." Kale's betrayal left wings shattered, yet the fleet clung to survival. Seraphine's voice returned, cold and unshaken. Seraphine said, "You will fall as you did before." Rian's jaw tightened, his voice steady as steel. Rian said, "Not this time." The stars themselves seemed to quake as destiny collided with rebellion, forging the storm's final fire. The rebel flagship broke through firestorms, flames streaking across its scarred hull. Rian gripped the controls, his voice thundering across comms. Rian said, "All ships, follow me, straight into her heart." Marcus stood beside him, steady even as chaos shook steel. Marcus said, "History will remember this night, one way or another." Liora's fighter blazed ahead, carving open paths with desperate precision. Kale's treachery left holes in their ranks, yet the fleet surged forward. From the enemy flagship, Seraphine's voice poured like ice. Seraphine said, "You always lacked the strength to finish what you began." Rian's chest heaved, but his reply struck with fire. Rian said, "I finish it here." The stars themselves felt suspended, as if awaiting judgment forged in fire and blood. The fleets collided at the Empire flagship's core, explosions tearing steel apart. Rian led his crew into the storm, his commands sharp as blades. Marcus's voice steadied, his orders threading chaos into fragile cohesion. Marcus said, "Focus fire, bring her walls down." Liora's scream crackled over comms as her engines burned, yet her fighter pierced deeper, defying death. Kale turned his guns on his former allies, his betrayal bleeding into fire. Rian's jaw tightened as he shouted. Rian said, "Ignore him, strike the core." The void shook with every blast, light swallowing shadow. Seraphine's laughter pierced comms, her arrogance unshaken. Seraphine said, "You break yourself against destiny." But the crack spread across her ship, steel groaning under rebellion's fire. The Empire's heart trembled for the first time. The core chamber breached. Rian stormed through shattered steel corridors with a strike team at his back. Flames roared, shadows twisted, alarms screamed. At the end stood Seraphine, regal and unbroken, her black uniform untouched by chaos. Her eyes burned with cold fire as she said, "We could have ruled together." Rian's chest tightened, memory slicing into resolve. Rian said, "You turned unity into tyranny." Their voices clashed like blades before weapons rose. Marcus stepped forward, hand steady on his weapon, his tone iron. Marcus said, "This ends now." Seraphine smirked, lifting her own blade of light, her posture unshaken. For a heartbeat, silence cut through the storm, a fragile calm before the clash that would decide the galaxy's fate. The battle in the corridor was brutal, steel and fire shaking with every strike. Rian clashed against Seraphine, their blows echoing years of history. She struck with precision, every movement regal and merciless. Seraphine said, "You were always too weak to lead." Rian parried, rage burning through guilt. Rian said, "Weakness is what made me human." Sparks exploded as blades struck, lighting their faces in fury. Marcus fired against Imperial guards rushing in, his voice unyielding. Marcus said, "Hold the line." Liora's calm crackled faintly in Rian's ear, her voice straining but alive. Liora said, "Finish this, before there's nothing left." Sweat and blood streaked Rian's face as he forced Seraphine back, his scarred cheek glowing in firelight. Every strike became not just survival, but defiance carved in steel. With a final roar, Rian's strike disarmed Seraphine, her blade clattering across steel. She fell to her knees, her cold eyes still burning. Seraphine whispered, "You will never silence destiny." Rian's chest heaved, blade aimed at her heart, yet his hand trembled. He whispered back, "Destiny is choice, and I choose to end this." With one decisive strike, her reign ended, her voice fading into silence. The ship groaned, collapsing under its own wounds. Marcus pulled Rian away, his voice sharp. Marcus said, "It's over. Now we survive." Liora's fighter limped free of the flagship as flames consumed it. From the void, the rebel fleet cheered, broken, but alive. Rian stared into the stars, scar burning, his voice hollow. Rian said, "The Empire is gone, but the scars will remain."